All right. Now, and it may be shared with people you don't know. So please be aware, if that's a problem, you can hide your video and mute yourself and just listen, or I will get you a recording once we figure out how we're going to do that. Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just check and see if there's anyone else sitting in the waiting room. And Gene Zeruto, thank you for the heads up on how to get out of that. Let's see if it worked.
I hope that worked, sir.
Let's see. Now my toolbar doesn't want to let me. Let's see. More. Manage participants. I think we're all managed. Oh, hi, dear.
Hi.
How would you like to be a camera person? This. My awesome, super awesome trophy wife just walked in, but she's safely off camera. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to Sourdough Made Simple. How clever. Before we begin, I want to make one point very clear. The object of this class, and there will be a quiz at the end of the class.
Oh no.
The object of the class is to make this so simple that you will actually do this over the course of the next week or so.
Okay.
There's a guy by the name of Timothy Ferris. He's written a bunch of books and have like told incredible numbers. One was called the Work Week. I think this is where the story comes from. And he tells about going to, I think it's Japan, to engage in this martial arts there. And I'm not sure, I don't think it was sumo wrestling. It was something like, and he went in and competed. What he found out was that if his opponent is out of the circle, they're disqualified. So instead of going in there trying to be the fastest, strongest guy, he just went in there to throw opponents out of the ring, which probably in the long run pissed them all off, but right? So I bring that up because that is really out of the box thinking. Whether or not it's ethical, whole nother thing. What we're going to do today is ethical, but it's out of the box thinking is kind of what helps people get this down. The only people who've ever had a challenge with making sourdough bread are people that are overthinking it. Or trying to they'll look at a bread book and then they'll look at this and say, well, we got it. You don't even have to touch the dough. This is sometimes called a no knead recipe. Okay, I'll show you how we're going to do it in a bowl today. So again, our overriding objective is to do this absolutely as simple as possible. We can do a class down the road and I'm going to have to mute folks. We get a little bit of stuff here. Stand by with me for a second. Oh, wait.
I can't believe that was better.
Isn't it all? Bear with me, folks. Okay, we are admitted, and I need to go to this.
To manage participants, and then you mute each one of us?
Yeah, hey, Dean, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Unmute yourself. I'm going to mute you, and then I want you to test the space bar.
Okay.
I think with the space bar, you can override the mute, but hold on.
All right.
My screen is not being the most awesome.
Start video.
Let's pause.
Jim, you've muted yourself.
Jim, we can't hear you.
Okay, post-recording take 2. For those who just joined us, we're being recorded. If that's not okay, mute yourself, take your video, shut down your video screen. You can still listen in, and we can also send you the recording afterwards. Point number 2, the whole idea of this thing is to make this so simple that everybody gives it a try. I went through a rather long-winded story about a guy that made things simple and won a martial arts competition. One thing you don't need while you're doing this is a cookbook. Stay away from bread cooking books while we're doing this. What I want to do is walk through real quickly what you're going to need to make your own sourdough bread. We'll mix up some starter. I'll show you what the starter looks like when it's done. We'll get some in the oven, and we'll show you what the finished product is. And then at the end of that, we'll do some Q&A. Okay? So first of all, what you need is a bowl of decent size. Whatever you're going to mix up, count on it doubling or more in volume in this bowl as the starter starts to feed. I have a really strong spoon for stirring. Again, you do not need this bread. You do not need to touch it with your hands. It's all with a spoon and a bowl. A vessel for the starter. I'm very fond of containers that are ceramic or glass. There's just something funky about a metal lined or a, I don't know what the other options are, but I'm very fond. This is like a jar I got at Ep.1 Imports. It's a cookie jar, I think, and you can tell it's seen a little bit of starter. And once again, leave room for expansion on that, probably half to a third of space, because the starter will puff up. It should not be airtight. You will create a small bomb in your refrigerator if you have an airtight container for your starter. So very easy, just pops right off kind of jar thing. Let's see, so vessel, starter, good spoon, a pot that has a cover that you can take to 450 degrees. I am very fond of ceramic pots. I'll tell you how to get those cheap in a second, as well as cast iron. This is an anodized aluminum pot I picked up at a garage sale for $1, and it does a really fine job. It's all metal. It can go to 450, no problem. Okay, stainless steel is fine. Pretty much anything you can take to 450. And typically the issue with that is the handles, whether or not they're oven safe. The ingredients you need: flour, water, salt, and the starter, which we'll talk about getting to at the end of the class. And two things I highly recommend are, number one, oven mitts. If you try to grease the pan or handle hot pots by with just hot pads, you will burn yourself. Oil spray, Costco sells this to a container kind of thing. It's worth its weight in gold. And then here it is, the Baker's Universal Tool. This is called a bench scraper. It's simply a bent piece of aluminum, and it is the bomb for cleaning up after yourself, as well as shoveling dough off a board if you decide to start playing with it. It's wonderful. Dollar store has them for, I think it's $1. Or you can go to Williams-Sonoma and pay $8 for one, something like that. But a bench scraper is just awesome for cleaning up all kinds of stuff. Let's see. And then the last thing you might need, if you have a trouble with, like I do, complicating things, if you can't keep this simple, the one thing I do recommend that'll make a big difference is Jack Daniels. If you have enough of this, you just won't complicate things too much, okay? That does not go in the bread, to my knowledge. But better in the baker than in the bread. Okay, let's mix a loaf. There is a way, by the way. Two people have entered the waiting room. Doggone. All righty. I got to get some people out of the waiting room. Stand by. Admittal. Greetings, recent entrants to the class. Let's see. I think we're gonna mute all. Yes, we are. And you should hear me. Cool. We're now moving on to the mixing up of the bread, and what that requires, and by the way, we'll be emailing you a recipe card, a recipe. I like to email them because then you always know where to find it, as well as how to reconstitute the starter. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. The recipe has some specific ingredients measurements. I don't do that much. This is going to be a double loaf, a double batch. So I put 6 cups of flour in this bowl, and then for every 6 cups of, well, for every 3 cups of flour, it's about a half a tablespoon of salt. So I need about a tablespoon of salt in there. You may or may not need to do this. It's my highly analytical nature, my OCDC, to stir it up with a whisk just to get the salt distributed, because you don't really need to do a lot of stirring of the dough. Now, here's the starter, which we'll talk about making in a second. It's flour and water, and I put in about, for 6 cups of flour, I put in about 2 cups of this, which is not enough to make a dough. It's gonna be kind of dry. So I just add water until I get a sticky dough out of the thing. Now, again, there's some specific measurements in the recipe that I send you, and it may be enough starter to make a sticky loaf by itself. Very simply, don't worry about the proportions of flour to starter. If you need more water, put more water in. If it gets too wet, put some more flour in. It'll take care of itself. It's really that easy. So now we're getting into the stirring this puppy phase, which you probably don't need to watch. We can shortcut that. Although it is valuable to see what this looks like before it goes on the rise. So let me do that for a second. As long as everyone's muted, anybody heard any good jokes lately? Just kidding. This might be a good time for Jack Daniels.
For you or for everyone else.
It's always a good
a
time.
good time.
That's right. Okay. Okay, cool. I got a nice little thing. I'm gonna see if this shows up on the camera for you. So this thing's kind of lumpy, and it's kind of gluey. There's a little bit of undone flour down on the bottom. I'm trying to kind of get incorporated into the dough. If your dough winds up a little more, how shall I say, malleable than you think, it's okay. If there's more water in it, it's just a matter of you bake it a little bit longer. We'll talk about baking in a second. So basically, this is kind of what it looks like when I set it aside for 8 hours to rise.
When I do it, it's much wetter.
It's much what?
Wetter.
Wetter. Oh, okay. My wife is telling me that when she does it, the dough is much wetter.
Because it's easier to stir.
Which makes it easier to stir. Yes, for those who don't have the upper body strength, but by the time you're done with this, you will have the upper body strength. Okay, so this is the dough. You cover it. I frankly just put a dinner plate over this. Cover it lightly. Again, if you have it airtight, you'll be making a small bomb. Not a good idea. At the end of the required period of time, the recipe will say 8 hours. Your dough is going to look like this. It's going to puff up. This is about twice what used to be in the bowl. It is recommended that 6 hours into the rise, you give the dough a stir. It's like a kneading. It just knocks the air out of the dough, and it promotes further rising in the dough. I don't get too hung up on that. I do go to rise it. Oh, so let's talk about how long to rise. Our kitchen's a little on the cool side. So when I made this dough at 10 o'clock yesterday morning, by 6 o'clock last night, it hadn't risen much. So I thought, okay, fine, left it on the table. I came back this morning, it had risen. So if the kitchen's cold, or if you have a little more water in there than you planned on, it may take longer to rise. That's okay. What you want to do is ideally get something that puffs up, 1.5, 2 times the volume that you had. And if you've gone 14, 16 hours and you don't think it's puffed up that much, don't worry about it. Throw it in a pan, bake it, and see what you get. I've amazed myself with what I've gotten out of a loaf that I didn't think rose very much, but lo and behold, it did. So we've got the dough. I did stir this morning. It rose again, and I'm now going to throw it in the pot. Notice I am not kneading this bread. So let's see, where should we start the fire? Let's do this. The big machine. Oh, darn it. When the thing's been in the oven, 450 degrees for a while, it gets hot and it gets smoky. Cold out there. And if you don't have a vent hood, you'll find out where your smoke alarm works. We've done that, haven't we, dear? Notice I said we, like she has something to do with it. I'm going to de-smoke that for a minute. I'm going to open a window for a minute. All right. First couple of loaves I made, I tried to take a paper towel and some butter or margarine or shortening and do the pot. I think I got third-degree burns a couple of times and decided there had to be a better way. Okay. Now, very ungracefully, I'm simply taking this dough and popping it in the very hot pan. And it doesn't look like much, I'll show you. Going in. Guess I'll close that. Let's see. So I've got a very rough looking loaf. That's going in. Let's put that back on, shall we?
Yeah, the lids, remind them of that,
That's always a good idea.
or the gloves for the lids.
This is a loaf I baked earlier this morning. It looked as rough as that going in, and it came out looking kind of like a little pretty artisanal little loaf kind of thing, right? So once again, very simple. Stir the stuff, throw in the pan, cover it, come back and visit it some period of time down the road. We'll talk about timing in a minute too, okay? If anybody has any questions, depress your space bar and let's see what we can do with it, okay? Someone's got a question. I'm not that complete.
Hey, Jim. So you spray your pan after you've heated it, not before.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I was doing that in the wrong order.
Yeah, I don't know. Did it work?
My husband says it stained the enamel in the, the cast iron pot with the enamel.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a really good idea to dedicate a pot to baking bread. I used to bake and then clean it and bake and then clean it. And it took more time to clean the damn pan than it did to bake bread. So that's when I started going to garage sales and thrift stores. In terms of baking stuff, actually, but not before I took one of our all-clad anodized aluminum cooking sets and dedicated it to the task. It's pretty much going to be baking bread for the rest of my life. But, you got your priorities. This is one of my favorite baking dishes. Who can guess what this is? Where it came from?
Insert from a slow cooker.
From a slow cooker, exactly. Exactly. So I hit the thrift shops when I'm near one, and I look to see if they have any crock pots, used crock pots. And I mean, I'll go in and say, all I really want is the inside and the liner, they call it, and the lid. You guys can have the machinery if you want it. And they're like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So this is just the bomb for a lid. And I actually wound up at some point, the lid broke. So I used the lid from another pot that I got at a garage sale, and it fits on it and does an awesome job. So once again, I love the ceramic pots. Cast iron, I like a lot in the anodized aluminum stuff. Essentially anything you can get at a garage sale or a thrift shop. Okay. Next question.
Jim, when you have added in, one time you gave us a loaf that might have had a berry or cranberry or something in it. At what point do you add your flavors in?
At the risk of making this complicated, because I don't want to scare people off, Jane, I will answer that. But I'd like to do a follow-up class. If you guys are interested, we can talk about, shaping loaves and also, bringing in, I think I gave you a cinnamon raisin walnut loaf, perhaps.
Yes, it was. And Jim, don't answer the question. Just let's save it for the next class.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, those are real easy to do and they're great fun. Any other questions? Oh, by the way, whenever you put bread in the oven, start a timer. I'll be right back. Let's see. Bear with me a quick minute. I start a timer and then I start the stopwatch on my iPhone or iPod just so I have an idea if I forgot the timer, how long the thing's been in there. That's not going to work. Let's go to, got that thing in there. I'm going to check on that in 30 minutes. The ceramic pot, I usually make a larger loaf in. That can take up to 50 minutes to cook. Smaller ones as low as 30. It's a trial by error thing. Oh, the one other thing that, if you run marginally OCD like I do, I've got a thermometer. Takes all the guesswork out. 200 degrees, 205. That gets you where you want to go. But you can also kind of thump it and see if it feels like it's, I don't know. Is there an honest to God baker on the call who can tell when the loaf of bread is done? When in doubt, get a thermometer. So that and that, I actually had a point list here. Makes a loaf, pull out the bakes, good. Okay, starter. I am happy to provide you all with starter. This is quite well dried up. It'll last forever until you start feeding it. And we'll send over instructions with it. What I'm going to ask you to do, if you would, is send an envelope to me that's pre-addressed. We'll throw a stamp on it. We'll put the starter in it and mail it back to you. But if you'll pre-address an envelope and mail it to my office, the address is on the email at the bottom. It's 591 Redwood Highway, Suite 1000. Make it Jim Walsh, care of Remax Real Estate. It'll get there. And that's in Mill Valley, by the way. But the address is on the email. So send us a self-addressed envelope. We'll send this out to you. You'll only need a tablespoon or two to get going. It's a 3-day process. You soak it, you add some flour and water, you come back the next day, add some flour and water, you come back the next day. Elizabeth, you've done this. How did that work out? Tell us about your experience reconstituting the starter.
It worked great. And your instructions were perfect. And the thing I liked best was the part that said, don't read anything by Tartine and just don't pay any attention. This was pioneer bread. You know, people had better things to do than to babysit it. And so it gave me a lot of confidence to try because I figured I probably can't screw it up if Jim says I can't.
Wow, such faith. Thank you. Yeah, that the analogy I love. Literally, pioneers in covered wagons coming across the country were making sourdough bread. How complicated could it be? So I just want you to promise not to pick up any bread cooking books before you bake a loaf or two of this. And your perspective will be so much more amenable to just doing it easily, okay?
How would I go about drying some of my starter now so I could share it?
Drop it on the floor and come back in a couple days. Just anyway, yeah, I scrape out of the bowls because I don't wash my bowls between baking either. You know, when it comes time to bake another loaf, I get a spatula, I scrape out the inside so it doesn't chunk out into the bread dough, and I throw it in a baggie, and that's what we've got. So the New York Times has an elaborate explanation of, I think they want you to use wax paper and spread it out and, you know, time it for 2.65 days. Too complicated. Wherever there's dried starter, scrape it up and put it in a bowl. It's just, again, covered wagons, pioneers, too easy. You can also freeze the stuff, but once I figured out that dried works just as well, I kind of like, why you forget? I would have forgotten about it in the freezer. I think we did a time or two. Monica says yes. Any other questions?
Hey, Jim, it's Claire.
Hey, Claire.
Yeah. So at any point in the baking, do you take the lid off the pot?
Great question. My all-clad pan, I do. Where'd that bad boy go? Oh, here it is. For whatever reason, and it's something you'll get the sense of. This is simply a stainless steel lid sitting on an anodized aluminum pan. And for some reason, it doesn't brown much. So 30 minutes into baking in this, and I think this is a 4-quart pan. 30 minutes into baking, I'll take the lid off for the last 10 or 15 minutes. And oh, by the way, if it's measuring 200 degrees on the inside and it's still really light brown, personally, I like my bread a little crunchier. So I will take the bread out of the pan, just put it in the oven for 5, 6, 8 minutes, whatever it takes to brown it up a little bit. But
Okay.
you're leaving the top on too long, as you'll just get this kind of whitish yellow loaf that's quite good on the inside. But it's kind of like, if you like uncooked cookie dough, you might like it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Let's see. So, we talked about the vessels. We talked about the starter. We'll get that out to you. We'll also email out instructions to you. Probably the best way to do this, because I'm anticipating a number, is if you'll email me and put in the title line bread. What should we say? Bread instructions. How about that? And that we'll just reply with the instructions on how to reconstitute the starter and how to bake the loaf. And then again, send the self-addressed envelope for the starter itself. I do want to mention a success story. Elizabeth is on this call, and at the risk of being too intimidating, Elizabeth, how many stabs did it take till you made that loaf of bread you sent me?
My very first batch was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't believe it. I thought, boy, this must be. And so I made another batch the next day because I thought, oh, I'm sure this is a one-off only. The second batch was gorgeous.
Score. Cool. Oh, people frequently ask about the starter and how long should they take, and how long will it keep, kind of thing. Like rising the bread, the starter is kind of a matter of the temperature of the room that it's in, right? So if you keep a reasonably temperate kitchen, 65 degrees or so, 8 hours is typically plenty of time. And then you can make another loaf. If you don't want to bake anymore this week, but maybe next week, put the starter in the fridge, stir it all up, put it in the fridge. It'll go about a week before it starts getting kind of margin. But even at that, the people who got me started on this tell me about, killing their starter. I'm not sure you can. I think if you took a tablespoon or whatever's in there that's whitish and did the reconstituting process, I think you wind up with starter again. It's just very, very forgiving and very, very simple. After 70, if you're going to go away for a while, that might be a good time to take a cup of it and freeze it, or a half a cup, whatever it is. Stick it in the freezer. That's probably the best solution, I think, to traveling. One thing I will ask from you all is that I hope you'll give this a try, and that I would love to see a photograph of the inside of your loaf, the crumb, as they call it. I want to see what kind of rice you got and how that's working out. I got to tell you, I've gotten a couple of great tips and reminders from people I've shown how to do this. In a follow-up call, we can talk about actually shaping the loaves, because frankly, I think it's fun to put your hands on the dough and kind of play with it. You don't have to do very much. You can do a lot if you want, but I shape a loaf in like 30, 40 seconds. And then I get a really beautiful thing on the outside. Then it really looks like an artisanal loaf. They both taste fabulous, but it's fun to shape them and kind of get them into shape. I was going to talk about buying the ingredients. If you get off and running on this, like we have, I have, about 90% of the bread I bake, I give away, because otherwise I'd be really big. And no one else in the house eats sourdough bread. Familiarity breeds contempt. So I joyfully give my loaves away, and it's just really fun to bake this stuff. It is so cool to get up in the morning and lift up the plate and say, oh, look at that pillow of living gewgaws, yeasties and bacteria. And it's just really awesome. There's something alive in the kitchen that you're going to bake in a few hours. So it's just so much fun to do. I bake a lot. I will bake 4 loaves. Well, it was up to twice a week. With the in-home restrictions and stuff, I'm probably baking 3 and 4 times a week. Susanna Denham, I think you've been a beneficiary of several of those loaves. Yes, you have. She lives across the street and has a large family to feed. So anyway, I buy the flour. It's simply all-purpose white flour. Costco sells it cheap. I buy it in 25-pound bags. The 50-pound bags are a little hard to deal with, just move around kind of stuff. You can use organic flour. You can feed your starter with organic flour. that's fine. I haven't noticed any difference in the loaf from organic versus normal flour. If you bake whole wheat, which I do, and this is probably class number 2, I will go about 50-50 or 40-60. I'll make sure there's a fair amount of white flour in there as well, because whole wheat has its own different set of characteristics. It'll take longer to feed, longer to rise, and if you're not careful, 100% whole wheat will be a really dense loaf. That's why they used to sell gluten, was to fortify whole wheat flour. They now have some flours that are high protein, which I think is high gluten, that rise pretty well on their own. So we get our flour at the basic white. We get at Costco. We get it Smart and Final. Thank you very much. And then here's the extra for experts. If you get really crazy about this and really want to like gonz out, there's a place called Justo's Baking Supply in Petaluma. It's right off the freeway, right on the frontage road, in fact. And probably 95% of commercial bakeries get their supplies there. It's a huge warehouse. And then they have a retail store up in front where you can get, I think the smallest bags they have are 10 pounds up to 50. So I buy my whole wheat flour there in 50-pound sacks, just because there's a particular brand from this guy we took a class with, and it's like, yeah, we got to support him. And it's a great flour, and it's just fun to go in there and pretend I'm a big time baker, right? And actually, that place has a cooking class program where the Artisan Baking, what's the C for? Company, Artisan Baking Company. And the gentleman who heads it up, show of hands, has anyone heard the name Craig Ponsford before? Yeah, okay, good. Craig, in Paris, once every year or two, they have an international bread baking competition, because Paris, oh, I've got a thumbs up. James Zeruto's heard of Craig. Had a girl. Ponsford. And so they have this international bread baking competition. Craig Ponsford is the only guy from America who went to Paris, the international competition, and won it. Probably turned the Parisians on their ear, but he went there and won the gold medal. Unbelievable. And he now has a little bakery on Shaver Street, which is just below 4th, a little cross street just past E, that opens typically Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but not necessarily every weekend. You know, he bakes when he feels like it, and he's getting guest bakers to come in. But anyway, he runs the baking classes there. And after I looked at their offerings, they were like, this is a 2-day class for $1,000. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's in the budget. He said, oh, no, we've got some, you know, we have that's for people that want to go get certified in the Bread Baking Guild. It's an official credential, and these guys are just serious about bread baking. Way too complicated for me, but he does offer some classes for neophytes, and I've got a picture of me and Craig throwing dough side by side. Just so really proud of it. So that's my Craig Ponsford story. Any other questions, y'all? Thank you, Jane. I love the applause. Gene Duffy, I see your lips moving, but you have to depress the space bar to be heard. Still coming up blank. Okay, let's see if I can unmute all. I know I can unmute you.
Let's try this.
There you are. Hey.
As far as your mixing bowl, first of all, what size is the bowl you're using to mix the dough? And if you had noticed any difference between using like a ceramic versus maybe a stainless steel bowl?
Great question. I don't know that I've actually noticed. In fact, I know a guy who's got a bakery up in outside of Guerneville, a B&B and a bakery. I think he's doing his dough. Casadero. He's doing his baking in a stainless bowl. So this is it's a ceramic. Oh, I'm not a great judge of. I'm guessing this is close to 8 quarts, Gene, 6 to 8 quarts. Again, I've got 6 cups of flour and 2 cups of starter in here, and it will, if I leave it long enough, it'll come up to the top. So I would just, as a rule of thumb, 2.5 times whatever the volume is that you've stirred together, and give it plenty of room to rise. That should do it. In glass, I'm just real fond of glass and ceramic surfaces. So that's why I use those. But you're probably just fine with stainless.
Thanks, Jim.
You are welcome, sir. Anybody else?
Hey, Jim, I have a question. Couple questions. Can you hear me? Are you there? Okay, first question is, so the ratio of yeast to flour is like 1 to 3?
You're saying by yeast, you mean the starter?
Yeah, the starter.
Well, the recipe I'm going to send you, I think you have a copy of it. So I think it says 2.5 cups of flour and 2 cups of starter. I'd say that's personally my experience over time has been that's more than enough. If I was doing 2.5 cups of flour, you're probably fine with a cup of starter. You can go to 2 cups; it'll be fine. I think the only challenge if you put too much starter in there, we might have too liquid of a loaf, and you need to put some more flour to balance out the consistency of it.
A liquidy loaf? Is that what you said?
Yeah, because the flour is basically a viscous goo, right? So
Okay.
recipe. Sorry, go ahead.
The second question is, when the dough doesn't rise very much in 8 hours, what do you suggest?
I would ask yourself how warm the kitchen is. It's probably because the kitchen's not very warm, and so I would just give it another 4 to 6 hours. It's remarkable. I mean, the dough in this bowl I showed you that had risen, it was laying really low after 8 or 10 hours, and then this morning it was like, kaboom, there it was. So it's kind of like, it's like if you had a chart, it'd be like not rising, boom, there it goes. I don't know.
All right, so we'll just wait for it to rise, huh?
Yeah, I would say if you go like 16, 18 hours and you haven't risen much, well, if it hasn't risen at all, something's fishy. But if you've got bubbles in it at that point, throw it in the oven, see what you get.
Okay, great, thanks.
Oh yeah, Monica's pointing out something too. You may be able to see. I'll tilt the screen. There, above our oven is a cabinet, and in that cabinet hides all of our cereal boxes. And what I will sometimes do is pull the cereal boxes out, heat up the oven, and get that space to warm up, and then I'll put the bowls up there. And it's probably like 70 or 75 degrees overnight. Then I know I've got a great rise in the morning. So if there's a warm closet in your house, if there's a water heater closet, that might be a place, kind of thing. Who was? No, I'm not even going to go there. Someone was messing around with heating pads, but I think that's going too far. Anybody else? I would love to see by show of hands. Let's see, either on the screen.
Hi, Jim. Nasu here.
How are you?
I'm good. I have a starter that I have, and it seems to have all the bubbles and wonderful smell, but it doesn't really seem to rise like I see on all the videos and everything.
Yeah? What kind of flour are you using? Hi, Lee. That's my sister from another mother. Yes, yes.
I'm using King Arthur flour, all-purpose, unbleached.
Should be just fine. And proportions, and you're putting salt in there?
No salt. Proportions, I weigh it, so I do 75 grams of flour and 75 grams of liquid.
Okay, and you get a pretty good consistency out of that, right? Dough-like? Oh, I'm going to unmute you, miss. Hang on, I can't hear you. Okay, talk to me.
She's muted again.
Oh.
Unmute. There I am.
There. Okay.
So it gets bubbly and it has a wonderful sour smell and beautiful taste, but it just doesn't seem to rise like I've seen in other videos and things. So
what I think is going on, the salt actually retards the rise. So it's very possible that the yeast may be really quickly on what's in there. I say it retards the rise. Let me rephrase that. The salt retards the feeding. It slows it down.
Wow, look at all this stuff.
And I had the experience once where I made a loaf without any salt, and I got a rise out of it, but it just as quickly fell because it fed so quickly. So I would hopefully you can deal with some salt in your diet, and you can put the salt and try it with the salt. It does play, I do believe, a strategic role in the process.
But you're talking about the bread. I'm talking about the starter.
Yeah.
You know, my starter doesn't rise. It gets all bubbly, but it never rises.
Oh, okay. Well, I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, if it's bubbling up, you're fine. Yeah. I mean, and you may have more water in your starter. I usually go 50-50. Oh, we didn't talk about really feeding the starter. The recipe card does. Basically, I retain anywhere from a half a cup to a couple of cups, and I'll throw in equal parts of flour and water, and it's pretty much eyeballing it. It's just until I get a good mushy, muddy kind of consistency. And yeah, you may have more water in your starter now, Sue, and so it may not just have enough to go poof. But if you're getting bubbles, the yeast are happy. They're in their own private little hot tub. Anything else? Okay. Well, guys, this has been awesome fun. Remember, let's see, two things. There's a quiz at the end of the class. What's the number one rule of this whole thing?
Don't read a book.
Good. On the way. Yes.
I have a question.
Simple.
How do you store the finished bread? I see, do put it in plastic, don't put it in plastic. I've been wrapping it in a linen tea towel.
Yeah, well, it depends. How quickly you're going to eat it.
Fast as I can.
I put it in a paper bag. That if I think I'm going to have it for more than a day, which around here, that's what happens. I will. I'll chop up the loaf into halves or even quarters. I will put it in double plastic bags and put it in the freezer. If you do that to be baked, man, I got to tell you, when you take it out, it's just like fresh all over again. And then the bread, I think I can eat the next couple of days. If I eat it the next day, I'll keep it in paper. Otherwise, yeah, I cross that terrible line of
What's
places.
the temperature in here right now?
Parisians hate it. In fact, it's against the law to sell bread in
That's
plastic.
probably what that says. That says 69.
It does kind of change.
Well, that's good.
The crunchy crust becomes as soft as the bread, and it's not as much fun when it's in plastic.
I wonder what temperature it is up where the dough is rising.
I'll go check it. More importantly, I want to see what it is
Okay.
in the bathroom with the.
Oh, sorry. No, I gotta go check my bread. My flaws with bread baking are lack of patience. And also we just realized that the oven is not heating to the right temperature. So I thought I was baking at 425 and I was probably baking at 375.
Oh.
But I think we detected that problem, but I'm dying to move on to the next phase in my bread making, but it probably hasn't risen enough yet. So I have to fight myself to let it do its thing.
Yeah, I haven't done it with patience and rising bread. You just got a plan for it, kid.
Yeah.
If you figure out how to speed it up, let me know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, my 30-minute timer is going off. Let's see what I have to watch. Where is that timer anyway? Oh, it's here talking to that. Oh my God, it smells like alcohol and yeast and stuff. And all right, so this is a whole wheat loaf that is kind of brown on the inside, but not so much on the top. And let's take a temperature. I think I brought that over here, didn't I? Here it is. Say ah. Da, da, da. And I could just tell by the speed at which this needle is going up that it ain't going to get to 200. And it's kind of gushy on the inside. So it's going back in. By the way, when you test the temperature, you don't need to take it out of the pot. But when you pick up the lid, you do need to wear your mitt. I have learned that the hard way. Right here.
Oh, me too.
Some good burn cream might be something to put on this. if you don't have minutes. That to me looks like a 10 or 12-minute add-on to that one. So it's going to be, this pot's going to wind up being like a 40-minute bake. Oh, I take that back. It was only 25 minutes. I have no idea what that timer was. It just went off. Yeah. 25, except one of them. Let's do that, and let's do that. Okay. Okie doke. So, 4 hours and 30 minutes. Oops. Bear with us. There we go. Awesome. So once again, shoot us an email for the recipe card and the reconstitute instructions. Send us an envelope with your address on it, and we'll send you this starter. Send me pictures of the inside of your bread, please. And I will figure out a way to make this recording available post-meeting. Sometime next week, we'll figure it out. I'm thinking about launching a YouTube channel for this, but all I know about YouTube channels is how to say YouTube channels. Now, Sue, I'm talking to your nephew about that, as a matter of fact. So if there aren't any other questions, I will wish you all a lovely Sunday afternoon. And thank you all for participating. It's really nice to see friendly faces. I don't know about you guys, but it's like, I miss people. So thanks. And if you guys, 1 second, Gene, if you guys would like to have a follow-up class about like baking this whole wheat and how to add into stuff, making a cinnamon raisin, or my knockouts potato bun. This is my lovely daughter Julia. If my one true the loaf of bread that blew even me away is I made a cinnamon peach loaf. Oh, it was no wait cinnamon apple loaf. Really easy, really good. We can do that in the second class. Okay, so just shoot me an email. Let me know. All right. All right, Gene, did you have another question?
Yeah, Jim, I had missed the first part of it. What kind of bowl do you use for your starter?
I use a glass. I think this was a candy jar or something. I picked this thing up at Cost Plus back when they were in business. Pier 1, excuse me, Pier 1. And so basically anything I would for the starter, I just really would that's probably the one more than anything else I'd stay away from metallic finish. So glass or ceramic, loose lid, nothing that seals hard. If it's airtight, as I said, you'll create a little bomb in your refrigerator. I was giving this stuff away to people in bell jars, the wet starter in a bell jar, and someone put it in their purse, and she told me about how she had to have her purse dry cleaned, and ultimately listed her home with someone else. Might have been a connection, don't know. Anyway. Yeah, I don't give away wet starter anymore. All right, you guys. Back to enjoy Sunday afternoon. Thanks for being on board. It just really is wonderful to spend time with you guys. Thank you. Enjoy, bake well, and send me pictures, and we'll get that stuff out to you next week. All right?
Thank you, Jim.
You're so welcome.